It has been so long since I've recorded a video that I have no idea how to start this. Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. I know it's been a little while, which isn't an understatement. It's been a while. It's been a little bit. There's been a lot going on, but it's fine. But I am very happy to be back recording videos for you guys, and I am very excited to talk about today's topic. So today we're going to be attempting to answer the question, why are Christian movies bad? I think it's no secret that Christian movies, especially within the past 20 years, have almost exclusively been not great. So I wanted to take this time to do a little bit of a deep dive and kind of go into what I see are the three biggest issues with modern Christian movies. Now, I do want to say before we begin, we will be going into this topic from the background of a bit of a Christian worldview. However, I will still be going into many general filmmaking tips and general story tips as well, and just regular criticisms. So even if you aren't a Christian, I highly recommend you stay till the end of the video, because I will be going into a lot having to do with just cinema in general. Now, before we get into the real meat of the issue, I wanted to take a brief moment to take a look back at the past of Christian cinema. Back in the golden age of Hollywood, you had movies like The Ten Commandments, Ben-Hur, Jesus of Nazareth, all of which were big blockbuster epics, with the exception of Jesus of Nazareth being more of like a mini series, but still, the point stands, they were all really well done, receiving commercial success, critical acclaim, and the Ten Commandments in particular is still to this day on countless top 100 movies of all time lists. In more recent memory, you have the absolutely phenomenal DreamWorks animated movies, Prince of Egypt and Joseph King of Dreams. If you have not seen these movies, please check them out. They are absolutely phenomenal. The animation is amazing. The music is surprisingly really good. The story and how it's portrayed is really engaging and interesting, even for someone who isn't like super religious or into Bible stories like that. I would recommend that anybody who's just a fan of animation in general go check out these movies. Now, this brings us to the modern era of Christian cinema. Nowadays, most Christian movies are almost always shallow, overly preachy B movies that, aside from like a few select David A.R. White joints, are not even fun to watch, ironically.
Hey, Scotty. Jesus, man.
These are movies like God's Not Dead, Heaven is For Real, Let There Be Light, pretty much anything with Kevin Sorbo in it nowadays, which is, it's kind of unfortunate. I kind of liked Hercules, but it's fine. I guess it's true what they say, you either die a hero or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain. These movies were not only destroyed by critics, they aren't even really well respected or liked by audiences, not even in the Christian community. So how did we get from these big blockbuster epics to atheists were mean to me once? Now, obviously, there are many reasons and many different steps throughout the decades that brought us to the current situation of Christian cinema, but I think Christian cinema's biggest problem is not the past, but rather what they're making currently. And there's a lot of issues that I view as major roadblocks that are kind of holding Christian cinema back from being either mainstream or commercially successful, or even viewed as anything other than not good. So this brings us to the main topic of the video, which is what are the biggest issues with Christian cinema today? Now, again, there are a lot of issues with modern Christian movies, so much so that if I covered all of them, this video would be way too long, and many of them are kind of like smaller issues and more just nitpicky things, and then others are also issues with just cinema and Hollywood in general on the secular side, not just the Christian side. So I narrowed it down to three issues that I view as the biggest or most pervasive and the most specific to Christian movies in general. Now, if there is an issue that you guys have noticed that I didn't cover in this video, or if one of these issues you think isn't really that big of an issue, please feel free to let me know down in the comments. I love reading your guys' comments. I love engaging with you guys, and It honestly really helps my channel if you guys comment. And while you're down there, you can go ahead and like the video and subscribe if you haven't already. It really helps the channel out with visibility in the algorithm and getting my videos recommended to other people. So any kind of engagement is really appreciated, and I would love it if you guys commented, liked, and subscribed. And with all that YouTuber stuff out of the way, let's get into the first issue. So the first major issue with Christian cinema that I see today is the audience. In other words, who are these movies made for? Now, it's no big industry secret that every film has a target audience in mind before pen is ever put to paper in the writing room. However, Christian movies seem to either not know who their audience is or how to effectively reach the audience that they're trying to reach. I think the most egregious offender of this is the film God's Not Dead. Now, if you've never heard of God's Not Dead before, we are going to be talking about it a lot in this video and be using it in a lot of examples, just because I think the issues that are pervasive in all of Christian cinema are most easily noticeable in God's Not Dead, and it's also been one of the more commercially successful Christian movies in recent time, so that's why I wanted to focus on it a lot in this video. So if you don't know anything about it, basically, it follows this young college student who is a Christian and starts taking a philosophy class with an atheist professor. In this philosophy class, the professor requires that all the students sign this paper that say, God is dead. Now, obviously, our main character being a Christian, he doesn't want to do this. So the professor makes a deal with him that if he can defend his faith from a scientific background, he will remove the requirement for signing the paper that says, God's not dead. It's a very simple plot. It's nothing we haven't seen before. It's by the books. It's about as shallow as you would assume. They don't really go into too much philosophy or theology very deeply, which is a little upsetting for me as someone who loves both of those things. It's not great. I don't recommend it. But anyway, God's Not Dead seems to be trying to cater to one of two audiences. Either Christians or people within the church community, or non-Christians or people outside of the church community. The issue with this film in regards to the first audience of Christians and believers is that, first of all, that group in of itself is way too diverse and vague to ever be able to effectively reach it in any meaningful way. And you also run the risk of just preaching to the choir or just telling the audience something they already agree with. Christians are already automatically going to agree with the hero and disagree with the villain. So you aren't engaging them in any interesting way or showing them something new or trying to get them to think about something in a different way, which are all the things that I think good art should try to accomplish, especially good cinema. Now, the issue with the second group, aside from also being too vague, is especially in a movie like God's Not Dead, if the audience you're trying to reach are non-Christians, you automatically fail because you alienated the audience by demonizing atheists and holding up Christians as like these perfect moral beings with no wrong, which obviously, since Christians are human, is not true. Now, this vague audience and kind of lack of direction or clear purpose causes the movie to become very disjointed very quickly. Very early on, they set up all these B-plots that are so shallow, don't really go anywhere, are like the most stereotypical basic B-plots that just only really serve to basically demonize anyone who isn't a Christian. That's the purpose of this movie. The purpose of this movie and the B-plots are to demonize non-Christians. So why the heck did you think that non-Christians would see your movie, and why are you then upset that non-Christians don't like your movie?
The problem with you is you're completely delusional. I am? Sure.
Now, it is possible to reach both audiences. It is possible to make a movie that is faith-based, that has a lot more weight to Christian audiences, but is still relatable to non-Christian audiences. I think a faith-based film that does this the best is the Martin Scorsese film Silence. While Silence isn't usually considered to be a Christian movie or a faith-based movie, I would beg to differ. The main topic of the movie, which is God's silence in light of difficult times and intense persecution, is something that is going to resonate so much more with Christian audiences than with non-Christian audiences. However, non-Christian audiences are still going to be able to relate to this idea of God's silence. Even people who don't believe in God have probably at some point in their life asked the question, why is God quiet? Now, speaking of persecution, that leads us to the second major issue, and that is the American Christian persecution complex. Now, what I mean by persecution complex is this strange obsession that modern Christian filmmakers, especially the likes of Kevin Sorbo and David Arrowhite, have with this idea that Christians in America or the West in general are constantly being persecuted for their faith. Now, of course, there are times where this does happen. In fact, the Bible explicitly states that you, as a Christian, will be attacked for your faith at some point in your life. However, filmmakers like Sorbo and White make it seem like persecution of Christians in America is a daily and regular occurrence, when that just simply isn't true. Of course, it's different outside of the West, with as many as 1 in 8 Christians living in countries where severe persecution is a very high risk for them. And there's even been plenty of news stories of Christians being beheaded, boiled alive, and even crucified in other countries. Because of this, modern Christians' obsession with mild persecution in the West is not only kind of ridiculous in the way they portray it, but I would also argue incredibly disrespectful from the hundreds of millions of Christians around the world who are actively being hunted and killed and tortured for their faith. We have it so good as Christians in the West, especially in America. So the fact that most modern Christian cinema is like obsessed with this idea that Christians are being persecuted in the West is just completely ridiculous, and I think is really holding films back because people can't really see past it. It's kind of hard to look past it once you notice it. Now, moving on to the final and what I view as the biggest issue with modern Christian movies, we come to the characters. Bar a few exceptions, a majority of the characters in most Christian movies are all incredibly bland and very one-dimensional. All the characters are morally black and white. The hero is always the moral good guy with moral motives, whereas the villain is always an immoral person with very clear defined immoral or selfish reasons. But that's not how it is in real life. Real life heroes and villains are not black and white. There's a lot of moral gray areas in the real world, and there's a lot of gray areas within the Bible itself. But for some reason, Christian cinema seems obsessed with just ignoring this and painting Christians as the good guys and non-Christians as the bad guys. No exceptions, no middle ground. The hero in modern Christian movies is generally one of two archetypes. They are either a bland, one-dimensional, good old Christian lad, or they're a bland, one-dimensional former Christian with alcoholism who left the faith for some vague and uninteresting reason, usually the death of a family member, and by the end of the film rediscovers their faith through some boring, we've seen this a million times before plot device. Now, occasionally we will see the resurfacing of a third archetype, which is the mysterious stranger with a dark past but a heart of gold who comes to Christ because they meet a pretty small town girl. But generally, it's one of the first two. The villain, on the other hand, is almost always the same. They're, again, a bland, one-dimensional atheist who's mad at God for some reason, and usually played by Kevin Sorbo. Not to mention the incredibly problematic role that African Americans play in Christian cinema as the wise old person with a prayer journal, but that is another issue for another time. We should probably find more roles for African Americans in Christian films. Now, all of this is obviously a bit of an exaggeration. This is a comedy video, after all, at its heart, but the point still stands, and the fact of the matter is that most Christian movie characters are just one-dimensional and feel more like plot devices than actual people. Like, they feel like they exist in the story to serve a singular purpose and nothing else. They don't feel like genuine humans. Now, this issue of viewing the world as purely black and white is pervasive in a lot of other areas of Christian media as well, especially music, and it's simply because moral black and white is simply just easier to digest for most people. Like, most people don't really want to think when they go to a movie or listen to music, which is a problem in of itself. But the thing with Christianity is there's so much interesting philosophy and theology and so many like good deep questions that they could be asking or answering in art, like movies and music, and it just feels like a huge missed opportunity to me. And it's also completely unrealistic. People aren't black and white. Christians aren't black and white. I mean, all it takes is a brief look at the long list of prominent Christians who have had massive scandals in the past few years to realize that Christians aren't perfect, people aren't perfect, and not everything is black and white, and not all heroes and villains are so easily definable. Not even King David in the Bible was morally black and white. That dude did some crazy things, but he's still a hero, and that's proof that heroes can have flaws. In fact, heroes kind of need flaws. Good heroes need some sort of character flaw to be relatable. If your protagonist is perfect or their biggest character flaw is briefly doubting their faith in the second act because they need to in order to follow typical 3-act structure, it's not interesting, it's not relatable, it's boring, it's dumb, it's bland. And real life villains aren't as obviously or inherently on the surface evil in real life as they are in Christian movies either, with even the devil being described as taking on the form of an angel of light or being described as good looking or attractive in the Bible. If the devil himself is not blatantly evil on the outside, then Kevin Sorbo's atheist professor shouldn't either. I think a great modern example of a really well done sort of morally gray villain is Killmonger from the film Black Panther. In the film, Killmonger is portrayed as someone with righteous goals, and his intentions are morally good, to the point where the hero even starts to question himself and whether or not he's actually the hero in the film. Complex villains and complex characters make for good cinema, and without them, if your hero is bland, then you've killed your movie before the first act even ends. So all of this begs the question, will Christian movies ever be good, or are we permanently stuck in this rut of Christian movies just being shallow, bland pieces of media thrown out there as an alternative to Hollywood for the little old lady in Iowa to watch with her grandkids? The short answer is yes. I think Christian movies will be good. And in fact, I would argue that we are starting to see a decent shift in the direction of Christian films sort of breaking out of this mold that they've cast for themselves and start to break into more mainstream success and recognition. Most recently, we have movies like I Can Only Imagine, which was not only decently well liked by critics, but also praised by audiences. And then you have other movies like Risen, which kind of harken back to the older Christian films of the Ten Commandments or Ben-Hur, where it feels more like a movie set in a biblical setting with like faith-based principles rather than a faith-based movie shoving Christianity down your throat. And then within the television sphere, you have incredible shows like The Chosen or History Channel's The Bible series, which were all really well done and are able to be enjoyed by audiences regardless of their religion. And as someone who recently graduated from a Christian film school, I can personally say that the future of Christian cinema looks very bright. I was blessed to be surrounded by so many incredibly talented artists and diverse voices who all have a passion for filmmaking and a passion for the gospel. So I think that the future looks bright for Christian cinema, and I'm cautiously optimistic that in a decade or so we will no longer be looking at Christian movies as Christian movies with a negative connotation, but more so just regular movies with some faith-based elements in them. Sure, the current state of Christian movies isn't very good and doesn't really offer much optimism to the future, but I personally am excited to see what the future brings, and I'm looking forward to the day where one day we can enjoy Christian movies simply as movies. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Subscribe. I forgot how to do an outro. Subscribe if you haven't already. Hit the notification bell, like this video, comment, share it with your friends, all that good stuff. Like I said, all engagement is good engagement. If you comment, likes, even dislikes, help my videos get recommended more and more visible in the YouTube algorithm. So please do all that. It really helps me. And I am now live streaming on Twitch. I've been live streaming for almost 2 years now. It's a ton of fun. It's very different from the content on my YouTube channel. It's a lot more Let's Play focused. But if you're into gaming or you're into live streams, please check me out at JTV Live on Twitch. We have a ton of fun over there. We do a lot of really cool stuff, and we have a lot of stuff planned for the future. We've built a really nice community over there of like really good people. So I highly recommend you check that out. And for now, I will see you guys in the next video. Bye, everyone.